obvious answer to that question is yes. The entire narrative of the story of Jesus is that Jews were bad people. They wanted Jesus dead. They got him crucified and were glad they got him crucified. They did it knowing that was what they were doing. And they were proud of their actions. Now, is this something Jews themselves accept that they do? I'm not sure. I don't think Christians ever asked Jews that question. It was just assumed that the narrative of the New Testament was true, that Jews did indeed get Jesus crucified, and they were pleased with it. But I happen to know that Jews say, that there is no record of Jesus. The most the closest reference to Jesus that could be found in the Talmud, and the Jews are known for writing everything down, was I think I have it somewhere, but they don't really say exact. Okay, the names don't agree. So there was this person called Jesus, and there was and he had a few apostles, but they were called different names. Let me try and find it for you. I wasn't really intending to talk about this, but basically, Jews said, well, we have no record of any Jesus, and we don't remember doing this thing. But, we're not going to argue with you about it, because whatever we say, you're just going to ignore it anyway, and then punish us for it, because you're the majority and we're just the minority. So I know Rabbi Yaron Reuben actually dug something up, and he did read it, and I did transcribe it. And now I can't find it. But the general area of discussion that I wanted to have is that Christianity is a religion of anti-Semites who worship a Jew. Now, if you accept that this is indeed Christianity, then you would have to accept that it is a religion that is, not to put too fine a point on it, mind-bending. And obviously, if you've believed in it for so long, then your mind would be well bent. And this means you won't be able to see things irrationally. But the aftertaste of such a religion for 2,000 years is really to make you hate Jews. Because the narrative, if you understand it, is that Jews got Jesus crucified. They basically, tried to make trouble for him. And then when he eventually said, my papa is God, they accused him of blasphemy and convicted him of it, and then hauled him up before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate had never heard of such a thing, that although Romans were not exactly backward in coming forward with horrible punishments for people, they only did it when it was considered necessary. And though the Romans thought of crucifixion, they obviously did it to what they thought people who were deserving of such a death, not, somebody who might be a bit doolally, who said his papa was God. I imagine that must have been what Pontius Pilate thought. That, there's this crazed young man who thinks his papa was God, and, well, he didn't particularly want to crucify the poor man for being a bit out of his head and, offending these strange people who were Jews, who were, well, a bit funny about lots of things about their God that didn't have an idol. But anyway, we know that eventually Constantine, the Roman emperor, adopted the religion of Jesus. And that meant accepting the narrative that Jesus is indeed God. And this no Christian would deny. They know what they're supposed to believe in. They know what the doctrine of the Trinity means, which is to worship Jesus as God. And this is held to be associating partners with God by Jews and Muslims. So there we have it. That is the problem. That is the theological problem that divides the three Abrahamic faiths. So while in this life and in polite society we can all agree to disagree about our precise beliefs and conception of the Abrahamic God, we know that if we're going to take things to their logical conclusion, we know that there is some ultimate truth. Because if we do believe in the Abrahamic God, then we would be supposed to believe that there is an afterlife, and when we are dead, when we come before our Maker, we will be told about whether we were right to think of God as one, or right to think of God as Jesus. I don't think anybody can deny this, however much they would like to. And so this remains the source of religious disagreement for people who are disposed to wonder about such things. If we really believe in our afterlife, then we would have to wonder who will, whether we ourselves will get in to the right place, and whether our friends and our family and the people that we would like to join us will join. There are often silly questions like, well, will our pets be able to join us? Do pets get to heaven? And of course we know a lot of people who don't believe in God, who believe in a different God, and it is a question that exercises many people when they think about these things seriously, probably when they are closer to death, or getting on a bit, to be thinking of these things. It seems obvious to me that one version is more logical, because it's not. Well, okay, it's not obvious that God created the universe. You can only deduce it by, working out the origins of the universe theory. So I think we can all agree, whether we believe in God or not, that there was some kind of Big Bang. And atheists tend to leave it at that. There was a Big Bang and the universe came into being. when previously there was a singularity, and we know the universe is expanding because we can see, I forget what theory it is now, that, stars are moving further from each other, and therefore the spaces between planets and stars are getting bigger, and obviously something is happening. We don't know where it's all going to end. Perhaps it will end in a big crunch when everything just sort of goes back to its original singularity. But anyway, it's consistent. This theory is consistent with a living universe that is changing even as we speak. And Christians are asked to believe that the being that created the universe is also Jesus. This is patently absurd, but many people cling to their absurd beliefs because they wish to reject the alternatives. They wish to reject the God of Israel, and they wish to reject the God of Muslims called Allah. Now, if we work out the underlying psychological reasons of why people might want to reject the Abrahamic God, it is easy to understand that, atheists don't want to be troubled with obeying God's laws because they are quite restrictive, particularly in a world where so many of the things that are forbidden by God are in fact allowed. And this is so in the West. The gambling, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll. So you're either part of the Western culture or you're not. Or maybe you don't want to be, but you know lots of people who do indulge in that sort of thing. And you either want to go with the flow and be assimilated, or you want to stand firm against it, and people are conflicted. Immigrants who have arrived might want to enjoy a bit of the decadence. And it is possible that those who are indigenous wish to stand out against it, stand up against the degeneracy being created, but they don't quite know how. They only complain, and they only see the people, the visible signs of change, the browning of their cities and their countryside, perhaps. And they hate the things that they can see because they are incapable of thinking in abstractions. And this is because the people most affected by these things are not very well educated. And they can't think in abstractions. But the people above them, the liberals, the senior government officials who are supposed to be able to discuss these things, the public intellectuals, they don't wish to touch the subject with a barge pole. But it is obvious, is it not, that Christianity is an absurd religion. And I'm afraid I can't not say it, because it is important to understand the origins of the predicament of people in the West suffering from the increasing corruption, incompetence, and insanity and evil of their government. They seem to think that I'm not mentioning morality or Christianity, well, things would be better. Of course not. If something is very wrong, then it has to be pointed out if there's any hope of correction. So I'm afraid I can't not point out that Christianity is kaput. And there are people who keep telling me not to say it because it's offensive. Of course it's offensive. I suppose if you, I don't know, if your arm fell off and you didn't notice, you might be a bit offended if I pointed it out to you. Because the feeling of, being confronted with your arm, assuming it fell off and you didn't notice, and I saw it and picked it up and ran after you with your arm to say, did you drop this by any chance? The bearer of bad news is frequently shocked, I understand. Because a person who doesn't understand abstractions would instinctively want to shoot the messenger for upsetting him with the bad news. But I wouldn't be doing my job as a social and political scientist if I didn't point out the problem as I see it. Now, obviously, I could be wrong, but I don't think so, am I? The reason your politicians are so corrupt and incompetent must be because they do not follow the rules. And when I ask what the rules are, nobody knows. They're not even the basics such as truth, logic and morality. The laws keep changing and therefore nobody really knows what the rules are this year, this week, which may be different next year, next week. And this is what people hate, the uncertainty, the inability to plan because the laws keep changing. And yet, they won't discuss the thing that I want to discuss, the failure of the moral system that is supposed to govern the West. The breakdown of the rule of law. These are abstractions that perhaps only academics can discuss. Lawyers, senior government officials who do not care to discuss these things with anyone, let alone me. So it's obvious, isn't it, that the universe could not have been created by Jesus, a deceased Jew. And those of you who can't come to terms with this absurdity must be afflicted by some kind of I don't know, denialism? I suppose you would want to deny that your ancestors have been duped into believing this absurdity for 2,000 years. I suppose that is really the problem. You don't want to admit that your ancestors, your empire, your nation, your civilization have been built on a lie. And that is really the problem. The Trinity is it is an absurdity, but people have died over it. There were wars of the Reformation, people being burnt at the stake. And I think the hatred of Jews is really fundamentally based on the fear that Christians have been duped by Jews into believing this absurdity. Well, there's no one stopping them from disbelieving in it except their pride, because Islam has been around for 1400 years. So in theory, if you reject the idea of worshipping a deceased Jew, you could have adopted Islam all those centuries ago, since the 700s, but you chose not to. I guess for no particular reason other than, well, they can't make us. We don't wanna. We don't like it. And now it becomes more painfully obvious that Christianity is kaput. Because, well, I've just told you recently that the American, French and Russian revolutions represent rejections of Christianity and monarchy. And this must mean that Islam is the more advanced model of ethical monotheism. Because a republic represents an advancement in political thinking. Obviously, when countries were smaller, they were run by tribes, and then tribes would have wars with each other, and then the triumphant tribe would turn the territory of the different tribes into a nation, and the nation might in time become an empire. And in time, the empire would collapse because of decadence, misrule, breaking your own laws, and then you would get the idea of changing the religion of your country to change the behavior of people, to make them more obedient to the government. And ways of making this happen would be to fiddle around with the rules. The Chinese call it legalism, using the law to change people's behavior. But fundamentally, we want laws. I mean, the ideal law is a law that everybody agrees with, that it's a kind of law that everybody thinks there ought to be a law against, such as murder, theft, because we don't want to be murdered, we don't want our stuff taken from us, we don't want to be raped if we are women, or if we are men who have women who might become victims of sexual assault. We don't want our women folk raped, and men also can be raped. So these are obvious laws. That decent people would want, sane people would want enforced in their country and their society. And I think if we want to think of ourselves as compassionate people, we don't want animals to suffer unnecessarily, so we can easily agree that we shouldn't eat animals while they're still alive. And then, if we were being sensible and reasonable, we would accept that we need a court and legal system to administer the laws. We don't want to be in a position where we are just hauled up before the king, the military leader, the absolute monarch who can decide to let us live or die depending on how they feel that day. There would be no precedent. It would be just the mood of the moment of the absolute monarch. So we don't want that kind of arbitrary justice. So we want the rule of law, and the rule of law can be evidenced in having an administrative system of justice and courts. So our laws would be contained in books. There would be legal precedents. That would be some order of hierarchy about how justice is to be given and how legal decisions are to be arrived at. And I think these 5 items I've given you are fair enough. You don't have to be a theist to agree to any of this. It's common sense. And now I come to the subjects of blasphemy and idolatry. And this would be the most problematic prohibitions in the no-hide laws. Well, the first 5 that I just said to you would be uncontroversial, I hope. So idolatry is difficult for Jews to explain to Gentiles, particularly Gentiles who are practicing the idolatry of worshipping a deceased Jew as the co-equal of the God of Israel and Allah. Obviously, atheists wouldn't give a damn. They think it's just as stupid to worship one God as it is to worship many gods. But there's also an argument that atheists are in fact also idolaters. They're unconscious of the fact that they worship their own opinions and their own beliefs and their own experiences and their own whims and fancies. They worship themselves, and that would be narcissism, and we know what happened to Narcissus. So idolatry, as far as I'm concerned, is not following scripture, either of the Torah or of the Quran. And that's what it means. And if you accept my definition of idolatry, then you would have to accept that the harm of idolatry is the opportunity cost of not following a better book of rules when you can. And this means that your people will suffer because of all the mistakes that your government is going to make because they're not rightly guided. So I was talking about antisemitism, which is still a very much a live issue because of Zemmour and the French presidential elections next year. If I were Jewish, I would be, well, if I were Jewish and French, I would be telling people to ignore Zemmour and vote for Marine Le Pen. Because if Zemmour manages to split the vote, then Macron will walk in again and Jews will get the blame, and so Zemmour would be fanning the flames of anti-Semitism because of his unwarranted political action in splitting the vote and depriving Marine Le Pen of electoral victory. I think Zemmour is going to appeal to people who like to hear robust language against the people that they hate, i.e. Muslims, who can talk big and talk tough, but ultimately not deliver the goods. They would be people who don't want to be accused of anti-Semitism, and obviously if you're supporting a Jew, you're less likely to be accused of anti-Semitism than if you're supporting Le Pen. But then the people who are afraid of being accused of anti-Semitism would be, well, less principled and more cowardly. And I think it is the female French voter who is being particularly targeted. Yes, the female French voter and the more snobbish kind of French voter. Whether Gentiles acknowledge it or not, the way they treat Jews is, well, they privilege Jews. Even anti-Semites privilege Jews because they just by accusing Jews of all kinds of things, of controlling, the world and whatever, and being, more cunning than Gentiles, they are putting Jews in a position above them. They may not know this, but that's what they do, and they blame everything on Jews. If you blame everything on Jews, you are crediting them with a greater power and status over you. So you can't really win whether you hate Jews and blame them for everything, or agree with them that they are God's chosen people. You're putting them in a position above you. But these people are, well, not very educated, not really analytical thinkers. They tend to be proles, plebs, people who didn't have a particularly good education, and that's why they're bumping along at the bottom, not being affluent enough to start their own business and run their own business. So they would be the workers that are not being hired because the business organizations prefer cheaper immigrant labor who would be just happy to be in the country and be prepared to work harder than the lazy, entitled indigenous people who won't get out of bed for less than $300 a week or something of that nature. That was what Frank Field, the Labour MP, was complaining about when he spoke to some of his Labour constituents. So what is to be done? I really think a form of slavery has to be reintroduced, because the eternal problem of government is really to get people to get on with each other through good gender relations and good labour relations, and this is not possible at the moment because there are so many taboos that the operation of democracy has placed upon government who want to continue this system, and that is why I reject democracy as a viable and sustainable form of government. I suppose it allows me to stand out because I reject the option of fighting any more elections. I reject the idea that Christianity can in any way now affect the behaviour of any Westerner. Because most of them are atheists, and those of them who are not, who they can only go as far as believing in a creator, and they won't be thinking that Jesus really was that creator, and this would make them closer to being Muslim if they're not already Jewish. So this is really a matter to be resolved in the minds of Westerners who are somehow not really thinking along these lines at all. They don't seem to think that they need a moral system imposing shared values that are, even if not always followed, would be generally known as being, a standard of public morality that would be part of their national identity. They don't think, as a people, we always do this and we never do that, because nobody's really certain who they are, what sex they are, whether they're Jew or Gentile or male or female, or old or young. There's been a blurring of the boundaries of how people dress and behave. Today, I saw a couple in front of me holding hands. I could tell from a distance that they were an old couple. But the annoying thing about watching old couples dressed as young people is that it seems inappropriate. I mean, I know I'm also in jeans, and that seems to be our uniform. She was wearing I don't even know what it's called. It's just one of those sort of puffy jackets that looked like duvets. And he was wearing a red anorak with jeans. I'm old enough to remember when people of a different generation would dress in a way appropriate to their generation. But I guess that, they've all come and gone and been dead and buried, and now we have the new lot who think they are Forever 21. In fact, there is a clothes shop called Forever 21, isn't there? So back to the subject of Christianity being a religion of anti-Semites who worship a Jew, which is absurd, which is, it's a religion of Europeans, or nominally the religion of Europeans, and they can't quite give up the idea because they associate it with their noble, historical, ancient European ancestry. And those who never believe still cling to it as one would to a family heirloom whose purpose may not even be obvious. We often come across strange objects that are pretty but and ancient and mysterious, but we might not even work out what they were for. But if white people are particularly triggered by Jews, I think it's because of their religion, which they've had for generations, obviously. And this raises the interesting question of nurture and nature, whether they were always like that, whether they would always always be triggered by Jews, or because there's some ancestral memory that lives in them still, in their DNA, about how much their ancestors hated Jews. I know there are many Christians now who regard Jews in a friendlier way, but then that's probably because they don't really believe in Christianity anyway, and they go to church to seem like good people. They like to go to church because they like the people they meet there, or whatever. And those Christians who are particularly being friendly to Jews, there's also a hidden agenda, you see. I know that Christian missionaries are going to Israel to convert Jews to Christianity, and they get more brownie points in being able to do this in Israel than converting any old Jew in any old Christian country that isn't Israel. And they believe, well, the ones who do, believe that if they do convert enough Jews, then it'll trigger the second coming of Jesus. And I suppose some Jews are conflicted, because what these Christians do is to give them money, be nice to them, and give them treats and help them with all kinds of things, and then pop the question about why you've taken so many goodies from us, why don't you convert? You seem quite happy to take our money, so why not take our religion and help us trigger the second coming of Jesus? That's kind of how it works, I believe. And I've been complaining about Western masculinity, but Jewish masculinity, they're also hiding behind the skirts of a blonde Texan woman. So the Orthodox community are being represented by a woman who was formerly Christian. It's very strange. But I think the feminization of men is not confined just to Gentiles in the West. So Jews are also these, Orthodox Jews are also these helpless people who think that a blonde, formerly Christian American Gentile is able to protect them from those horrible Christian missionaries who are flying in from America to convert these Jews to Christianity. And the fact that they do this is conclusive evidence that Israel isn't its own country, is it? It survives at the grace of Uncle Sam. It's a Western colonial outpost. All the Jews there are really seen as a resource to be harvested for American missionaries who want to convert these Israeli Jews to Christianity to trigger the second coming of Jesus. And the secular government cooperates with these Christian missionaries. It's pretty obvious that Israel is not really its own country. It enjoys no national sovereignty. Imagine if Israel wanted to become a Torah theocracy. It would have to ask permission from the Americans. Please, sir, can we become a theocracy now? And the Americans wouldn't allow it, and whoever proposed such an idea would be assassinated, as the late Rabbi Kahane was. He was the only Jew, the only rabbi who thought it could be done without the help of the Americans. So talk of Israel becoming a Torah theocracy is taboo. These Jews know what's going to happen to them if they make too much of a fuss about it, or if any leadership emerges about wanting to become a Torah theocracy. The Americans will deal with them pretty quickly. So it is fundamentally a problem of morality that so many of us living in Western nations operating liberal democracy are not feeling much hope for the future or trust in our government, because we know that there are long-standing problems that are not being corrected and are even now being pushed under the carpet. Our governments don't want us to have children. They don't want our children to have children, which means that we won't have descendants. They really want to warehouse us for extinction by replacing us either with other immigrants or with AI. They can't be bothered to govern us anymore. They can't be bothered to deal with us or ask for our vote or anything of the sort. And so they think that by creating driverless cars and driverless trains, they can get things still working without the bother of having to deal with industrial relations, labor relations, gender relations. They can avoid all the difficulty of these negotiations. But I don't think that's sustainable simply because those who create these driverless, the programs for driverless trains and driverless cars would eventually know their value of their technocracy and make, they would want to empower and enrich themselves at the expense of the governments and the people that need their services. So I don't think that's sustainable. And I think common sense would, tell us why it's obviously unsustainable. And this command in the Bible to go forth and multiply within wedlock, of course, is a sensible one in a sense, because we know what happens if we don't have enough babies. We will become a senescent society and a feminized society too, because the women at the top and the bottom, and I mean, the females, the elderly females will tend to predominate because women stay around longer than men, and so they would have their, if it's a democracy, they would have that kind of female preference prioritized because there are more of them. And when women are young and sexy, they will command great persuasive power. Macron won the French presidency because I believe 80% of women in France aged between 18 and 25 supported him. And they must have made a lot of men support him too. And this brings us to the subject of democracy and its unsustainability. All these stupid people who vote these people who think they know everything but don't, are in fact being encouraged to vote and to make their preferences clear in our system of indiscriminate universal suffrage. So there's quite a lot of errors for the average Westerner to acknowledge. And it seems he is no longer capable of discussing these matters in an honest or rational way. Instead, I suppose he will be looking to blame the Jew or the foreigner or the Muslims to explain why he is being so badly governed. Now, do Jews in any way bear any responsibility for the bad government suffered by the Gentile? A case could be made for them, well, against them, because they refuse to teach properly the Noahide laws in 2,000 years of Christianity. They may have tried, but there's no record that they did so. And I don't think there is any record of any Jew properly teaching the Noahide laws in 2,000 years of Christian history. So if they are being punished with antisemitism, this would be the reason. And as for Christians suffering, well, they would be punished for their idolatry and blasphemy. And if you're just an atheist, you're still guilty of idolatry, and I'm sure you will be, blaspheming against God. What about Muslims who do not obey the command in chapter 18, verse 4 of the Quran that commands them to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son? So all these Abrahamic faiths are guilty in some way of not obeying God's laws. And it is ironic indeed that I, an agnostic, should be pointing this out to Jews, Christians and Muslims. And they don't like it one bit. There is a certain irony that I would be the one in the position of doing this. And since I have pointed out the problem, the solution is obvious. All Jews have to do to make up the omission of not having taught properly the Noahide laws after 2,000 years of Christian history would be to immediately remedy this by ranking the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws. And this would mean they would have to say, whether they like Muslims or not, that Islam is the most Noahide, followed by Buddhism, which is atheist, followed by Hinduism, which is idolatry, and right at the bottom is Christianity, which is both idolatry and blasphemy. It's blasphemy because Christians have been worshipping a Jew convicted of blasphemy for 2,000 years. And I guess this is the only way that Jews can deal with rising anti-Semitism. If I were Jew, would I be thinking of running to Israel? I don't think I would. Well, I haven't visited Israel, but to be living in a country where, well, surrounded by hostile Arab nations, that doesn't seem a particularly safe place. And okay, you know, I guess if I were a Jew and I realised that lots of people around me hated me, that's also uncomfortable too. And we know that in the in certain neighbourhoods, certain, you know, Muslim majority neighbourhoods, Jews living there find it very uncomfortable because these Muslims really, really hate the Jews and do occasionally murder them. And not all of them can afford to up sticks and move somewhere else. So the way Jews could protect themselves could be just to do what I have been telling them to do, which is to do what they were made God's chosen people to do. And I think the best time to do this sort of thing would be now, when most Westerners are really post-Christian or cultural Christians who don't even believe in God, let alone that Jesus is God. So I don't think they would be too angry. I mean, I think it would set in motion a lot of interesting questions and dialogue that I hope will be platformed by mainstream media to lead to a morally satisfactory conclusion when all sensible Western nations finally arrive at the conclusion that secular Quranism must be the way forward. Right, so Midnight Rider, hello. Who guides rightly, Colin asks. The Quran guides rightly, although the interpretation of it could be wrong. I don't know what you mean by... Sorry, who looked at his reflection too long and got old? Although always predictions of the world ending, we have to take them with a pinch of salt, don't we? We have to take into account the fact that it's probably a practical joke. So, you know, you think the world's going to end, you don't plan for the future, and then, you know, the world carries on and you've kind of eaten all your food or something, you know. And drunk your supplies of water or wine or whatever. So I think that there's still a lot more, you know, human history to continue with, and I don't think people should be thinking that, you know, the end of the world is at hand just because they want the world to end. I do understand that you can think yourself into a kind of mindset, into wanting the world to end and then eventually believing that the world is about to end and not doing anything because you think the world is going to end, and then finding that you've messed everything up and the world is going to continue and you've lost all those opportunities while you were expecting the world to end. So Colin, you bet 400 quid on the pen. I used to put political bets on and then I thought, no, it's actually unlucky. And then, you know, you'll be, what's the word? Drawn into committing to your bet, and then you'll get tunnel vision, or you know, or if you close your bet, then you'll have to. You know, you'll start wanting to justify that you closed your bet, and anyway, I can't bring myself to bet anymore. I used to be a betting girl, And now the fun has gone out of it for me. Feminisation of men is not necessarily code for being gay. I think you can still be heterosexual but think like a woman, i.e. virtue signal to feminists. That would be a sign of feminisation. You know, when you not necessarily because you agree with women, but you sort of know that, you know, if you can predict how a woman might think or say, you will get more power if you get your, you know, if you predict correctly how a woman's going to respond to, you know, whatever. And well, you shouldn't be submitting to the female preference because, well, it's not in the national interest, for example. Colin wants me to name a woman who isn't an idiot. I can't name a man I admire. I mean, I know a few sort of go part of the way to where I am, but I don't think anyone's really got the idea or got more of a better idea of things than me. I mean, I don't think you have really any grasp on the situation, and I know you deliberately blind yourself to so many things because you don't want me to be right. But so far, nothing I have said has been challenged. I don't think that I'm wrong, you know, just because you don't like it. I mean, I see that lots of people reject my ideas because they can, and not for any particularly sound reason. So I will try and sum up what I thought I said. So, of course, Christianity is a religion that incites antisemitism, and so a lot of Jews are afraid of challenging Christianity, particularly as they live in a majority Christian country. Or, well, I mean, but that's the thing. Do we in the West live in a majority Christian country? I don't think so. You know, what we see of what we think is Christian is not living Christianity. They are but the artifacts of Christianity. Yes, you see a lot of churches being used, you know, church schools, nurseries, creches. But are the people who use it actually Christian? No, they're not being used by Christians. People don't really believe in God. And if you don't believe in God, then you don't believe that Jesus is God. Do you? I mean, first you have to believe in God, and then, you know, you can work your way towards believing Jesus is God, because Christianity is a derivation of Judaism, and without Judaism there would be no Christianity. So I see that people are not really getting it because they don't want to admit that they've had the wrong religion for 2,000 years. And they don't want to face the consequences of correcting that. Which is all very predictable, but it does make it clear that what I say it still stands because it has not been challenged. No alternative has been proposed by anyone, as far as I know. So secular Quranism is still king and queen of the alt-right. You can't name a smart man, Colin Colenso. You can't name a smart man, because everybody's stupid and degenerate now. Midnight Rider says, remember priests were complaining of non-religious music used at funerals? Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On was getting played and annoying the bishops. Yeah, it's sad, you know, it just messes everything up, it messes the culture up. You know, I did it my way, is you know, one of my favourite hated ones. Hi, Tiffany. Well, what have I said, Colin, is what stupid women think. Oh, Newton. No, I'm talking about moral philosophers. Obviously, I'm talking about that, not scientists. They would have to be talking about moral and political philosophy, right? It's interesting that Colin can't think of any smart man that isn't a scientist. Yeah, talking about Newton, he nearly didn't get into university because he couldn't bring himself to say that Jesus was God. And that meant he couldn't have been able to get into Oxbridge. But fortunately, you know, somebody pulled some strings and he managed to get in, or Britain would have been deprived of the knowledge and genius of Newton. So Colin talks about Rothbard, who, what's the cleverest thing Rothbard ever said? Yes, yeah, Jefferson obviously was a brilliant man, but I'm talking about men now. They're not capable of coming to any conclusion about anything important because it's all too frightening. Lady Mary Wortley Montague, it rings a bell, but I can't remember what she did. She must have been some writer, some poet. I'll look her up. So she went to Turkey. She was a traveller. And she was known for introducing and advocating for smallpox inoculation to Britain after her return from Turkey. Well, she was taking a chance about the inoculation thing, I suppose, but, you know. It's interesting too that now we're talking about the vaccines. I wonder, we've all heard of Edward Jenner and what he did to with his inoculation experiment. But I wonder, if his subjects for experiments actually knew what they were getting themselves into. Yeah, so there was a smallpox epidemic in 1721. And it wasn't a safe process, because once you get it, you could give it to others. Yeah, it was a bit high risk, wasn't it? Okay, so they were using unsafe methods until Edward Jenner came along and used cowpox instead of smallpox. Yeah. Nick Fuentes, Colin, are you gay from Nick Fuentes? That's the first thing I remember of Colin. He always goes on about Nick Fuentes. He'd like to see me debate him. Well, I don't mind if you can arrange it, but he blocks people left, right, and centre. I remember thinking, oh, he blocked me. Now I wasn't even being rude. Maria Oressa, haven't heard of her. I'll look her up. Filipino American journalist. Is it a? Yeah. Combating fake news. She was arrested for cyber libel. And she was found guilty of cyber libel. And she's an outspoken critic of President Duterte. A few people like him, Oh, we'll have to see if President Duterte does well for the people of the Philippines. So what do people think of Duterte? Do you wish your president was a bit more like Duterte or not? well, if you're going to arrange a debate between Nick Fuentes and me, yeah, I won't back down. The Archbishop of Canterbury pops out on TV to remind people there is a church. Okay, so Midnight Rider is saying that the church is there and that means Christianity is working. And I'm saying no, it doesn't mean... That is not the sign that your religion is working. The only sign of your religion working is if its principles, if it has any, is reflected in the law of the land. That's the only way you can tell that your ideology is being enforced by law. Do you see? Just because, there's still people who go around singing carols and attend a few church services because it's Christmas and they like listening to carols, doesn't mean that Christianity is working. Because religion is about imposing morality, and morality is about rules that are enforced and followed in order to keep the group in existence and apart from others. So if you're just solely concentrating on the outward appearances, the artifacts of a religion, then you're not really looking at the right thing. Islam just understands that, obviously, if you believe in the Abrahamic God and you think that God is benevolent and took the trouble to make laws for humanity, then you have to follow them. And that is the logic of the thing. It's not, how does morality even operate in the West? If the law tells us to do X, then we are, that would be the orthodoxy, right? So the people in charge have gotten so far as to say, this is a law, you better follow it or you will be punished. So that is the only operating rule. So, whatever they say about, I think you already know that Christians don't really believe in anything. They don't believe in anything. They don't defend any principle. Or if they do it so badly as to always fail. And then they don't say the thing that they need to say to make it work, because they refuse to contemplate the measures that will make things work again. Either they start burning people at the stake again to make Christianity work, or they take it out with the trash and replace it with, Islam. And they're obviously not doing either. Tiffany asks if I'm planning to convert to Islam. No, I'm not planning to convert to Islam, because I'm basically saying that you don't have... Look, secular Quranism is for non-Muslims. It's for non-Muslims in the West who want their government to have policies that are in the national interest. So you can be Muslim if you want, but if you don't want to, that's also fine. It's optional. But you'd only adopt it if you thought the rules would work for you, and therefore you would only think they would work for you if you plan on getting married, you hope to get married, and if you do get married, you want to stay together, or you have offspring whom you would like legitimate offspring from. Or you could be gay, but you can concede that on the whole it is better for couples to marry before having children. I think you can concede that, can't you? Unless you're so far gone that you can't even acknowledge that it would be better on the whole for the next generation to be brought up by their two married parents living together in a loving relationship. If you can't even say that, then, well, you don't really deserve to live in an advanced civilization. And obviously the only way to restore the patriarchy is to use theocracy. And theocracy is a society governed by God's laws. And God's laws are only found in the Torah and the Quran. And since most of us are not Jews, it has to be the latter. It's a very simple, logical way of reasoning. And the people who don't want to do it are people who have no offspring, or who don't care about any offspring they might have, and therefore their views should be ignored anyway, right? Tiffany says, I want to adopt their rules of society or not accept their God. Well, I would make their God, it's the Abrahamic God anyway, so it's a God of Israel, and it's a God that Christians are supposed to believe in. So I wouldn't call it their God. I think it's a deliberate, blind spot by Christians who want to otherize Jews and Muslims by saying they believe that their God is different to the Christian God. Though, of course, the conception of the Christian God, includes a blend of the Holy Spirit and and Jesus with God, blended in there, in a Trinitarian blender. So yeah, we would be, having a different set of rules. So the Quran would be part of the Constitution. It would, guide what laws are allowed and not allowed. And, and that would be better than fighting over Supreme Court judge appointments and still not getting your way, as Trump found to his disappointment, that all the judges that he struggled to get appointed, so in the end they submitted to the culture because they have no principles. That is the problem. They will do whatever is expedient, because Christians don't know any better, do they? Do they know any better? Do they have principles that they can point to? So Millennial starts tomorrow. Well, I'll be watching and reviewing it. Christianity is making white people weak. Well, I've been trying to explain that, it is a stupid religion. I mean, you listen to these rabbis and you compare the kind of stuff that comes from Christian sermons, and everything suddenly is obvious. Why it's so stupid. And you try and talk to Christians, they don't talk any sense. If you let them, they'll keep quoting these verses that they should already know that you don't accept. So it would have no authority on you. Quoting Matthew and Luke and John, and it's like, I don't care about your book. It has no authority. It's not going to impress me that, Luke said this or Mark said that. So even their method of discourse is so pathetically ineffectual. It's not just one Christian, they all do it. I've spoken to Christians in Speaker's Corner, and they can talk for a long time, but nobody's listening and nobody cares because they have no cogent arguments. So they might stand around while this Christian preacher is ranting on about this and that and quoting verses at you, and then when you ask them a question they completely ignore you. I mean, they can't explain how Jesus is God, and they can try and distract you by talking about something else, but they can't reduce it to a single answer, can they? They can't. You try asking a Christian how Jesus is God, and they won't be able to tell you in a single sentence. They'll go out all around the houses and quote all these verses in the Bible, in the Old and New Testament, but they won't mean anything. I think Colin is talking about John Vance. Well, I can't help it if, I can only work with the available talent. And obviously, they're going to say they're secular Quranists. I'm not going to say no, and they'll be taken, through their paces. And interestingly, John Vance only stopped being a secular Quranist when he converted to Islam. And I thought that was interesting because it's actually these Muslims who ultimately made him avoid secular Quranism. And I suppose because he had so much trouble becoming Muslim and, lost all his Christian friends, that he couldn't bear the idea of losing his new Muslim community. And that was why he had to give up on secular Quranism, because he couldn't bear the double isolation of being rejected by his formerly Christian associates and being rejected by his Muslim community. And so that's why it's better not to convert to Islam, because once you do, you'll come under their authority, and once you go to their mosques, they'll be telling you what to do, and if you don't do what they want, they can reject you, so you would be in a worse position than you were in. And that's one of the reasons I won't advise anyone to convert. So Tiffany says, it's hard to accept God exists. Well, you ask a very interesting question, which is that why would God allow bad things to happen? But you can reason it from how I mean, I guess he would say, well, I didn't do it. You did it to yourselves by not obeying my laws. Because I have created a system in which the sin is its own punishment. And that is undeniably true, isn't it? You know, all these things you're not supposed to do, and you do it, and then, you know, ooh, you feel pain, you feel discomfort, you see your civilization declining. And the answer is obvious. If you believe in God, then you just retrace your footsteps. You know, when you're lost and you realise you're, you know, somewhere else other than where you're supposed to be, then you would have to retrace your footsteps and, you know, go back to you know, where you took the wrong turning, and then this time take the right turning, right? So, while we are supposed to believe in a perfectly moral God, we also have to believe that, you know, perfect morality means punishing sin and rewarding good. And the idea that remorse and penitence leads to redemption is surely, you know, the whole operating idea of having a personal God, isn't it, Tiffany? I mean, you don't have to believe in God to know that that's how it's supposed to work. Because, you know, obviously, if we are all morally perfect, then we would never have sinned and everything would be lovely. But since we are tempted into evil all the time, the requirement for the concept of redemption to always exist would be logical. So, you know, you redeem your mortgage by paying back, you know, whatever you owe the mortgagee. So, I guess you need to, you know, repay your debt to society. You need to make good your omissions. You need to correct your errors, and the way to do that is to acknowledge that something went wrong and be prepared to discuss it outside YouTube with somebody in real life, because it has to be real for it to gain some sort of momentum and acknowledgement. And, you know, YouTube is not really the place to do it, because a lot of it is, you know, empty words and wasted time. Now, the commercializing of their religion, what exactly do you mean? The prosperity gospel? I mean, Christianity is really very cynical, but, you know, because it has very few rules. Anybody can come along and say, well, let's do this with Christianity, and just, you know, put the label, the sticker, the uniform of Christianity, but really, you know, it's some, you know, sinister idea. And this is basically the problem of idolatry. You don't have the guidance of the Word of God as contained in the Torah and in the Quran. And this means that anybody can, you know, put a hat of Christianity on and claim to be Christian, and with plausible words and oily snake oil, they'll get you to do what they want. So Frank, whom I knew from Discord says Christianity is stupid, but so is Islam. You will see, I don't think Islam is stupid. You may think some Muslims are stupid, but, you know, we need rules. And we need rules that we can't easily change. Midnight Rider says, so what you're saying is that the Anglican and Catholic Church in Britain are there, but are in no way influential on British society and becoming less relevant as the older generation pass away. Well, I don't even know what you mean by influential, because I mean, I suppose influential in the sense that, oh, we all celebrate Christmas and Easter and we love carols and we sing hymns. I mean, that I suppose is, you know, the main badges of Christian identity. But what do Christians actually do? Do they behave? I mean, what rules do they follow? And it becomes obvious that they don't really follow any rules. They will lie and they will cheat and they will think that praying to Jesus will cancel all their sin, and then they'll think, oh well, you know, I've just confessed my sins, I can start again because my slate has been wiped clean. So this is an enormously corrupting process. Yes, Christianity is pagan and that's why Europeans love it. Well, idolatry, as I've been trying to explain, is a natural inclination. We like to look at pretty things, right? So, you know, sculptures, statues will be admired, you know, well, particularly of people we admire, people who are supposed to be beautiful. That's why, well, you have so many great works of art in Italy. You know, Michelangelo's, well, his sculptures and, you know, all the rest of it to express the beauty of the human form and the lifelike. Statues, you know, with the, you know, robes blowing in the wind and that kind of thing. So yes, that is very impressive. But maybe too dangerously so, you know, because we think, oh, aren't we clever? What have we done but to replicate life itself, to create a human form in a piece of stone that is so like the human? Aren't we clever? Maybe we are our own gods. Which is not to say that I want anything bad to happen to statues. Because I think the natural inclination to appreciate beautiful things is, on the whole, healthy. You know, we just need to have boundaries in our mind about, you know, what this person that we have fallen in love with is getting us to do. We need to, you know, only love good people and not love evil people who may use and abuse us, and we need the wisdom to know the difference. Yes, Gary Garner's stack of ribs. Good is incapable of being understood if we do not know the meaning of evil. in the sense that, we won't be able to understand cold if we don't know heat. We won't know tall if we don't know short, etc. So we have to choose the light. Yes, monotheism is a problem for a lot of Europeans, and they should just get over it. And it can be explained to them if only the Jews and the Muslims dare. But they seem a little afraid, and that's why I'm doing their job for them, and they're not doing it, are they? I am taking a much stronger position on Christianity than these Jews and Muslims will. Yes, the most logical religion will survive, because one of the best religions would be the ones that are easy and strong and simple. I think that there seems to be two Abdullah al-Jalals. They seem to be contradicting each other. So Gary says the most illogical religion is thriving, but is a complete hegemon. Are you saying Christianity? I don't think it has everything its way. The most logical religion will survive. Well, it's logical to think of a creator if there was a creation. So do we think of the universe as a creation? I mean, we do talk about it. Even atheists talk about the Big Bang as if, yeah, they do talk in terms of it being, the beginning of creation, right? So it would be logical to ask, if there was a creation, whether there must have been some creator. So back to the original title, which is Christianity, which is the problem, in my view. You have something that you assume to be the basis of your moral system and your civilization, and over the centuries it has slowly broken down, and nobody has seen fit to properly discuss it, and therefore people don't know. So you have a combination of people who think Christianity is the religion of the West, or Christianity is kaput, and then you have people who think Christianity may be broken, but it can be put together again to be made to work. And the fourth school of thought is Christianity is irretrievably broken, and cannot be repaired, and we must think of what to do now that we know our moral system is broken and cannot be repaired. The answer is obvious, I would have thought, but there are many people who are intellectually and morally crippled by their Islamophobia, such as Colin Colenso, and they have nothing better to offer, but they will continue to mock at ideas that they dislike and that they know most people like them who are corrupt and nihilistic and atheistic. They will continue to reject the only solution because they think they can get away with what's left of their civilization, and they are older men and they think that Western civilization will last for long enough before they pop their clogs, and since they don't have offspring, they don't really care what happens when they are dead. So these people can obviously be ignored and dismissed. The only people who would care are people, with the desire to have a future, who will be prepared to correct themselves. But it is possible that, even young men are so jaded as to be unable to form the intention of wanting to be married fathers. And this means that people of religion will be given an additional advantage, because people of religion would have, come from generations of parents who marry before having children, and will have passed on the idea that they should marry before they have children, and this might give them the edge over atheists and nihilists who were formerly Christian, and that will explain the great replacement theory that white people keep fearing, because they can't even form the intention of marrying a woman of their own race and fathering legitimate children with her and staying with her until the children are grown up or forever, in order to have some parental control over their offspring. But if you don't have these goals in mind, then you will be living alone. Please, you don't have a family to support and no offspring to be responsible for. And this, I think, perfectly explains what Christianity has eventually done to Westerners. Because, as long as Westerners were practicing marriage, they could carry on. I mean, it didn't really matter that what they believed in was nonsense. They could, think rationally, act rationally, have offspring, pass on their traditions. But once they stopped practicing marriage, they basically got all these holes in their head that they can't fill up with anything that makes sense. The decline of Christianity is not new. It started with the Protestant Reformation. I don't... So are you saying that the moment the Pope stopped having the final word on matters of doctrine, Christianity died? Is that what you're saying? I think the moment Christianity failed was when they basically stopped burning heretics at the stake. When they stopped doing that, belief in the Trinity began to die. Because after the wars of the Reformation came the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was all about questioning God's existence. And as for the Protestant Reformation, I would say that the Protestant Reformation was a manifestation of national consciousness on the parts of the European monarchs who got fed up with being told by the Pope what to do. So it would make sense that eventually most European nations became Protestant. Because why would these kings be told by the Pope whom they could or couldn't marry? And then, after the European wars of unification, some countries became republics, like France. When did Italy become a republic? Let me just look up that. The last king of Italy, was it Victor Emmanuel? 1946. Yeah, the predecessor to the last king of Italy, who died in 1983. I didn't know that. I didn't know. Actually, I didn't know. So it's Umberto II of Italy. So he died in 1983. He reigned for 34 days. He was the only son among the five children of King Victor Emmanuel III and Queen Eleanor. In an effort to repair the monarchy's image after the fall of Benito Mussolini's regime, Victor Emmanuel transferred his powers to Umberto in 1944 while retaining the title of king. As a referendum on the abolition of the monarchy was in preparation, Victor Emmanuel abdicated his throne in favour of Umberto in the hope that his exit might bolster the monarchy. However, the referendum passed, Italy was declared a republic, and Umberto lived out the rest of his life in exile in Cascais on the Portuguese Riviera. Oh. I think the life of Victor Emmanuel III, it would be quite interesting. So how did he get on with Mussolini? That's really what I wanted to know. He did support Mussolini. Or he was a weak king. Well, I mean, it's logical, isn't it, to get rid of the king, because, what is the point of the king except to be the leader? And if you're not the leader anymore, why even exist? And this is a question, I suppose, that many Britons will be asking themselves. I mean, now that you see that nobody, that Harry has decided that he'd rather be an American than a royal. Okay, so I found the bits about Victor Emmanuel. Victor Emmanuel took no responsibility for appointing Mussolini Prime Minister, saying he learned from studying history that events were much more automatic than a result of individual action and influence. Victor Emmanuel was tired of the recurring crises of parliamentary government and welcomed Mussolini as a strong man who imposed order on Italy. Mussolini was always very respectful and deferential when he met him in private, which was exactly the behaviour which the king expected of his prime ministers. Many fascist gerarchi, most notably Italo Balbo, regarded as the number 2 man in fascism, remained Republicans, and the king greatly appreciated Mussolini's conversion to monarchism. Oh, I didn't know that. In private, Mussolini detested Victor Emmanuel as a tedious and tiresomely boring man, whose only interests were military history and his collections of stamps and coins. A man who Mussolini steered as too diminutive for an Italy destined for greatness, a reference to the king's height. He was only slightly over 5 foot. However, Mussolini told the other gerarchi that he needed the king's support and that one day another fascist revolution would take place without contraceptives. Abdullah Jalal says the rejection of Catholicism was the last stage. Last stage of what? I disagree with you there. I mean, if you're talking about the last stage of the beginning of the end of the beginning, there'd be more rejections of Christianity after the Reformation. There was the founding of the American Republic and the implicit rejection of monarchy and Christianity. Now, I've been saying to so many Americans who don't seem to get it, that the founding of the American Republic was based on Islam. So the First Amendment was based on Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, which says, there is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error. And there is a White House Quran, and it belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which subsequently became the First Amendment. So, and then the next event of rejecting Christianity was the French Revolution, of course. And then the third one, if a third were needed to confirm the rejection of Christianity, would be the Russian Revolution. So it's been done. It's been done 3 times already, and the penny has still not dropped. Now, obviously the media, it doesn't promote a healthy image of fatherhood because men are no longer in control of society. What we have now is matriarchy, and we know we are definitely matriarchy because more than half the parents in existence are not married parents. Yes, Jalal says, Christianity went from God's word that cannot be changed, to a more flexible religion that led the West to atheism. Well, the New Testament is not God's word, is it? That is the thing. That's why I keep going on about the New Testament being the word of mere mortal and fallible men. while the word of God is contained, or supposedly contained, in the Torah and the Quran. And this no one can deny. Even if you say, oh, but it's all lies, it was all, the Jews wrote it. Moses wrote it when he, communed with God, and he was, whatever they thought he was doing. But the point is that they got the narrative right. The narrative is that the Torah was handed to Moses on Mount Sinai, and so the Torah is the word of God. And the Muslims also say that the Quran is the directly revealed word of God, revealed through Muhammad. And so these words are not from Muhammad, they're from God himself. And that is how people are meant to understand the narrative of these respective religions. But, Christianity and the New Testament, it's not even from Jesus, they're from God. And who are Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? And, nobody else confirms their existence. Do they? Implicitly, everything is already, there are no foundations to Christianity, because the only mention of Christianity in, let's pull back a little bit. Torah doesn't mention Jesus. Tanakh doesn't mention Jesus. Not his name anyway. Of course, the Old Testament would say stuff like there will be a Messiah will come, but the Jews don't think it was Jesus. And the Christians say it was Jesus, but things are still crap, right? And finally, there is no word of God saying Jesus is God. And you would have thought, after God so carefully, made such a big deal about giving the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, watched by, all the Jews assembled below at the base of Mount Sinai, that's quite a story. All these witnesses of God handing the Torah to Moses. Yeah, but who's Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? Who are they? And who else mentions them? There's no mention of these Jews in the Talmud or any historical Jewish record, is there? You would have thought they'd say, well, this Jesus, we know about him because he was the son of whoever and whatever. And we know that Jews obsessively write things down as part of their tradition. But the New Testament, it's a mishmash of letters from Paul to, a whole bunch of people, and it's a digest, a compendium of, the word of men of dubious provenance making an absurd claim. Yeah, I think, the problem is that Christians can't come to the terms that they've been duped by their government, by their monarchs. And it's time that Jews and Muslims help them along to come to terms with the enormity of the fraud that was perpetrated on them. So what did your great grand uncle say about the Pentateuch? Why don't you tell us? Luke Ford had his father's. Luke Ford had a father whose career was destroyed because he took the wrong side in a theological debate. Does anybody even know what it's about? I once looked it up because it made no sense. It's like, well, what did he say wrong? And they're obviously still upset about it, but I don't know what it was about. Do you? Imagine having your career ruined over something that nobody cares about. I bet Luke can't even explain it. He took the wrong side, and therefore, I mean, why was it so bad? And that is a pointless, I mean, that's just, another nail in the coffin for Christianity, that so many people had their lives destroyed arguing about some minor point of doctrine that nobody can be bothered to understand anymore. So it sounds like it was about the age of the earth or something. Now let me explain to you my attitude towards these narratives. I'm really only interested in the laws, and I will choose the laws that are least restrictive and make the most sense. And I know there's only two to choose from, either the Torah or the Quran, and not being Jewish and not wanting the more restrictive version of God's laws, you have to choose the Quran. It's only logical, particularly if you're agnostic, and particularly if you acknowledge that you need to follow laws that are said to be made by God himself. Because if you only agree to man-made secular political ideologies, then somebody else will come along and say, well, that's rubbish. That person who created these laws and this political ideology, well, they're dead now, and we're alive, and we're going to, destroy the silliness and nonsense of white-haired men. All right, I think I've vented enough about why Christianity is a religion that incites antisemitism, and why white people are so obsessed about Jews and think Jews did it to them, whatever they did. And I'm also saying that maybe Jews are partly to blame because they haven't once taught the no-hide laws properly in 2,000 years of Christian history, and we know they haven't done it properly because the last 3 global empires have been Christian, and Jews can redeem themselves by ranking the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the 7 no-hide laws, and this means that they would have to rank Islam most no-hide, followed by Buddhism, which is atheist, followed by Hinduism, which is idolatry, and at the bottom of the heap is Christianity, which is both idolatry and blasphemy, because we know that Christians by their own admission have been worshipping a deceased Jew, convicted of and crucified for the blasphemy of saying his papa was God.